Beardy and the Beast Media Club.
Ba-da-ba, ba-da-ba. This is a placeholder intro song.
Hello and welcome to Beardy and the Beast Media Club, full spoiler discussion into film and media. Unlike some gifts, spoilers won't be faked here. We are available on this and other services with a full list available at beardyandthebeast.com. Please feel to rank or follow us. However, if you enjoy what we do, please give us a share. I'm Devin, and joining me in our moonlight procession, Drew.
Hi.
Today we'll be discussing the 2013 Studio Ghibli film, The Tale of Princess Kaguya. This is an animated film adapted from the Japanese folktale Bamboo Cutter and was directed and written by Isao Takahata. So, Drew, were you able to find your happiness with this?
Uh, yes. And no. And then yes. And then no. And then yes. And then ultimately no. Uh, I don't want to go into a big rant about it yet. But there was a whole lot of things that I really liked about this film. And then there was a few Ghibli-esque points that I didn't.
All right.
As you know from previous discussions, um, Studio Ghibli movies can be very hit or miss for me,
Right.
and this one towed the line so spectacularly. But that being said, let's let's just go directly into the emotions
Yeah.
of this one. Speaking of like happiness, sadness, themes of being free versus being like secluded and contained. How did you feel yourself while watching this film?
Oh, it's interesting. So, there's a few things a sense of familiarity with the film, and even though I hadn't seen it, it's something resonated there right away. I think you yourself know I'm a big fan of fairy tales and
Mm,
folklore,
mm,
so it may have just been kind of picking up on some of those folklore tropes. Like I, it was a little bit of a roller coaster. One of the things that I kind of felt was like the song that Kaguya and them all sing, was talking about the seasons.
mm.
I I kind of felt like I was riding turning of the seasons throughout the film. Like it seemed to be a spring and then a summer and a fall and then a winter and kind
Like
of
emotionally?
yeah, the emotions did tie to that. So you kind of have that, oh, this is kind of that upbeat, energetic spring, right?
Mm.
Some change, and then you had the summer. It's like, yeah, you're going through and enjoying everything, going into a winter or going into a fall when they start the move, uh, and then kind of following that train,
Hmm.
right? Um, so I thought that was done really well. Um,
I agree, and I like the way that you put that. Actually, um, that I don't think I would have put it to words as well as that. I definitely felt that roller coaster and the change of emotional seasons.
yeah,
I know one cool thing is during this film, once she started um, wearing the traditional Japanese garb and the layers, they
yeah,
were actually in the amount of layers and in the colors related to that time period and the seasons.
yeah,
I bet you if we were to rewatch this with that in mind and looking for that specifically, we would be able to match the emotions to what she was like physically wearing in the film.
yeah,
For me, the emotions were a lot of that like kind of sadness and finding yourself versus searching for joy versus expectations
yeah.
is kind of what I saw, and it was kind of rotating in between them, which I found jarring in the middle of the movie
Mhm.
because it seemed very rapid, as if it was kind of like a slow change during the start between the seasons of emotions, and then it started rapidly going during the middle.
Yeah.
and then it kind of honestly I feel like it ended on a winter. Like
Oh, I completely agree that there. And yeah, it's interesting you say that about the emotions like that because like I kind of picked up on the seasons thing right away. Like as soon as I
mm,
heard the song, I'm like, that's important to this. So I kind of started writing in my notes, like, okay, this feels like we've hit fall. This feels like we hit winter.
mm.
And I almost expected an end to the film at winter, and then it started the cycle again.
That's
So
probably where I felt jarred.
yeah, exactly. And I think it was very possibly because the season cycle had changed again, and you're not expecting it necessarily. A lot of the other things, like I felt like I had a lot of the story beats. I think I kind of picked up on uh, early. Like again, that season thing is what stuck with me.
Hmm.
So like my immediate thoughts were something like she's going to be short lived. Like I was expecting her to arguably die, which arguably was there. And I know that that the writer director had actually said that yeah, no, there is a metaphor of death there. So um, I kind of called that early on, uh, done in a slightly different way. But I mean that could be more Japanese culture because this is a very traditional story.
And to be honest, like there's so much contained within this film. Like
Yeah,
I could watch it another two times and pick up more things each time and still be missing all the little things. And I did notice a lot of little things, and I think beyond that, the culturally specific stuff was a whole lot of that I was missing in that aspect. I'm glad
yeah,
that you picked up on the song as being an important part because I did as well. But for me, it was the from more of a like foreshadowing or character narrative standpoint as far as Kaguya. I guess at that
mm,
point, Little Bamboo, which was
yeah,
endearing to me, that kind of told me like her being one with nature and then being like taken out of that and then eventually returning to what she considers home, I guess you could say. I guess I mean in the context of the movies calling it home, the Moon Kingdom or whatnot is not the right terminology because she referred to home as the mountain. But I think not to get too far ahead of ourselves, the emotions of it, the animation did well in a similar manner to our recordings on the second wall, Carol and Tuesday. Though the frame rate's higher with the characters on this, the way of the facial expressions on the
mhm,
important characters in the scene are so apparent.
yeah,
You can see the concern in the bamboo cutters, the father's face. You can see the joy that having this baby has brought him. You can see the life like draining out of Kaguya's eyes when the more she gets to being donned in these silks and having to deal with, princess protocols. So that being expressed to me, like I'm very visual in that manner. Seeing those facial expressions, I think, did so well to transmit the emotion of the characters,
yeah.
and that's probably what separated that this movie from something I would not enjoy to something that I would.
Okay.
If this was in a more Fern Gully,
Mm,
such a basic form of animation, it's all narrative, all music, and that's what they push the emotions with.
right.
If this was in that same animation style, when you asked me the opening question today, I would have said two thumbs down, worst movie ever. But because of the emotional transference, like how they were to able to visually represent the characters' emotions, is what allowed me to connect with the characters
Right.
and be involved in the story emotionally.
Yeah. For sure. Like the everything about it, you could see the joy in the father, the and like all the way right to the very end with the glance back to the earth
Mm,
from her, right? Like it's just it kind of breaks your heart, or when she's about to don the moon robe and snaps out of it for that second to essentially say goodbye to her parents. Like the emotion was so there, and it's actually something that shocked because I was tearing up a bit, and the the snap changed when she actually gets that robe put on her.
Oh yeah, you
Um,
can emotion to that blank, like, because obviously when she puts on the robe, she forgets who they are. Which I mean, we can talk. I'd like her and that glance back and that tinge. You can tell that the emotions were still calling to her, even though she didn't know who these people were. There was something drawing to her, which they. It was just so beautiful that in such a simple environment, what they could do with the characters.
yeah,
It even started off more like a classical painting or even a watercolor. And you would see things like baby Kaguya like just rolling around all roly poly, which I had that emotion where you see like a child who's filled with glee and kind of filled with joy, and you kind of empathically pick up on that, and you kind of like you have that feeling like, oh, I wish that was me right now.
yeah.
And I had that with this character on the screen, as simply animated as it was.
Like I know the simple animation is based off of Japanese scrolls. You see
Yeah.
one in the middle of the film, and no, you're right. They did that very well. 'Cause again, I think you get right at the beginning. You had that pure joy, and she had like the little, is it the frog or the cricket in her hand, and it jumps off, and just that instant snap, and just like, oh, that's how babies are. And she starts crying because it ran away from her, and I think they really captured that well, and they just captured the life of the world
Mm.
really well. Like especially in the those opening everything before they go to the Capitol. Like you just hear the music, beautiful music throughout the film, cutting out, and you just get that nature sound, and it's kind of like I want to go out to the mountains.
Yeah, the, the characters and how they moved, especially the young boys on an adventure versus Kaguya versus like the drudgery of work, but the bamboo cutter like seemed to still love what he was doing, so the way he moved, like spot on. Like
Yeah,
I couldn't ask for anything better, especially to represent something that is more folktale orientated.
yeah,
The music is actually the first thing that I noticed, even before I realized that the verbal introduction was that of a fairy tale or folk tale.
yeah.
Because that original music, just that simple piano with what sounded like a music box, I
Mhm.
think, just set me up so perfect for the following scenes with the bamboo cutter finding the girl in the bamboo shoot, and like there was a mystical yet playful yet mythical aspect to the way that the sound design was done.
Yeah, the exact word that I wrote down was whimsical
Hmm?
and very inviting, especially when tied with the watercolor pastel credit scene.
And it was warm.
Yeah,
Yeah, thinking back to it now, going into it, the colors were definitely warm and inviting. And
yeah,
even that scene where like he discovers the girl,
yeah,
the way that you could see that in an actual painting to represent a spirit or a goddess would be in the exact way you see it in the film.
yeah,
So the music lead up to that scene, like if you were to just give me a short of that, I probably would have been satisfied as
yeah,
like a whole piece of art. I felt throughout the movie it kind of there was scenes of that, but it was also sparse in between. As in like the key points were very well structured and thought out, but a very loose bridge between them. I don't
mm,
know if I can express that well. But that also might be, if I were to think about that from a positive standpoint opposed to a negative one, because my connotation now is negative. If I look at it from a positive standpoint, that could also just them having a sound design that was so well thought out that only the cue point or the key points were represented in a way that I recognized.
Right.
I'd have to go back and watch it to really see, but
In in like just thinking about it, so I mean, it was the most of the music did play with the same song. It sounded like to me, like
mm,
I was constantly hearing. I I wish I knew what the song was called, but I did not think to write that down. But it was constantly throughout, and I found it really interesting because they did make it sound a little bit darker sometimes, and like almost a rocky sound, like when she was practicing,
mm,
right? Um, so I really enjoyed that aspect. And again, I think an important thing that a lot of people forget about when it comes to sound design and music and such, especially you don't see it as much now. The silences and the lack of music is just as important.
yeah, and that's like to call back to our very first episode, Silent Hill. If you haven't listened to it, go ahead and listen to that after this. Um, the the lack of sound and just hearing a character's footsteps or like a animal whimpering or crickets in the distance or a lack of can express so much about the environment of the scene and will instinctually make you feel uneasiness or happiness or being calm. For instance, if you're out in the forest and all of a sudden you don't hear any animals, you start feeling defensive and wary. Whereas if they express that in a film well, you'll get that same anxiety.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think they did quite well at expressing that in this film. But I mean, from this studio, I wouldn't I wouldn't expect any less.
Yeah.
This is kind of one of the key points, key things that they're good at doing. Though sometimes their stories can be hit or miss for me personally. Don't shoot
Yeah.
me.
There, regardless of if the story works for you, you can't ignore the quality that's come from the studio.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's we discuss this all the time, you and me. We how you got to separate the good parts of the film or what it's done for filmmaking in general as a whole or the negative aspects from the whole piece.
Yeah.
That being said, it's been a while since I've seen a Ghibli film, meaning I didn't come into this with the same expectations I usually would, which are usually
Right.
high. And that's might be why I've been let down in the past from them. But that is a long story thing. Get me on a Q&A and I'll
Yeah.
rant about it for a while.
For sure.
As a whole, some of the themes that they get into, they seem to like to paint them in an abstract and then pull them in nice and tight and then let them bleed out again as if you were painting in watercolors.
Yeah.
You let in with like, did you find your happiness? I wrote that in my notes down as joy, but happiness is the better descriptive term.
Mhm.
This this film to me, and I think there might be something culturally missing. Like I actually went and I listened to a couple different takes of the Tale of the Woodcutter, or sorry,
Okay.
Bamboo Cutter, before the podcast today, and it's as you would expect because it is a folk tale. There's different versions, so this is just a adaptation of it, and it's gone in its own way. So it didn't help
Right.
at all for me.
Yeah.
There were some thematic points, but I just they were different enough. I couldn't decide if let me step back a moment.
Sure.
Folk tales, fairy tales.
Yeah.
There are they're usually supposed to be some form of lesson or moral teaching or something as simple as be cautious of strangers or be good to your parents. And the way that they structured this movie made I kept having this feeling from the beginning of it. It's like what is the morality or teaching that I'm going to absorb from this?
Right.
And I couldn't decide and I was wondering if you had any takes on this for the film because
So
I have a couple and this kind of
so I had a couple. I guess I'll go with the one that kind of was hinted at, but ultimately wasn't accurate um, first. So, one thing I know with the little bit I do know of Japanese culture and things like Shintoism and such, there's always a big thing of balance, like between nature and being in the city. Definitely shown very well in a Spirited Away, Mononoke,
Mm.
right? So that was one thing that entered my mind. I thought she might have been the spirit of the forest or of the
Mm.
mountain at first, especially when, during that fantastic nightmare scene in the middle, she goes back in the mountains dying. I originally thought that was because she was pulled away, and I thought that's where the theme was going. But I think the other thing that I kind of picked up on somewhat earlier on was, yeah, this is still when she was like a baby. The other thing was that idea of happiness actually did stick with me. And as soon as like you found the gold first, right, in the bamboo, and my first thought was, this is going to corrupt him.
Yeah, I had that
He's
same thought.
he- yeah, he's going to be looking for happiness for himself and not for Kaguya, and that's what I saw happening. I don't think that it was malicious in any way. I think it was that, you know, best intentions
I'd
type
like to
thing.
throw another layer on it.
Mhm.
Of course, being more of a traditional piece, you're probably looking at more of a traditional fatherly mindset. So, a father's mindset in that aspect would be providing for his daughter.
Yeah.
So, what I took away that kind of expands on your point, and I agree, I got this same feeling as well, was that his joy or happiness was for ensuring that his daughter was provided and set up for and would be, the highest position and the most well kept, and that would bring her happiness.
Right.
So essentially, searching for, trying to obtain happiness by providing, but he was providing the wrong things.
Yes. And that's exactly what I meant by not being malicious.
Yeah.
It's that not paying attention. I almost got, it's been ages for, so I'm not sure if the reference is actually accurate. I almost got like a Death of a Salesman type vibe from him.
Mm.
This is what it's supposed to be. This is how you're supposed to be happy, by being the salesman, when in reality he just liked working with his hands, right? And not seeing that in them. And there's also, of course, the just the cultural difference. I mean, this is a very traditional piece, so those ideas of happiness would have been completely normal when the piece is taking place, right? It's like, you're happy when you're married to someone rich and stuff like that because that's
Yeah, if you have
how
power,
you
if you
do.
have influence. I definitely got that, and that was one of my main thoughts throughout the entire thing. And it's the one that held the longest.
Mhm.
The other ones that I got, but some of the lessons that I learned were there is an amount of happiness a girl can obtain through self possession
Mhm.
that is not being the property of somebody else or a thing, etc. And that was kind of a theme that they kind of pulled into repeatedly. There
Okay.
was points where the father unknowingly was treating her like an object, like a goal of happiness, and then of course the entire situation where the potential suitors were relating her to objects, etc. The other one was simply just happiness as a girl being herself,
Mm.
so not being made up to something she's not. But I couldn't tie it in, and this, it might be again the cultural differences, but I couldn't get one overarching thing. The only other thought I had, and I don't think it's this, I just want to say it to see if you caught on to it. Seeking fortune and nobility will cost everything,
Okay.
because it happened to the bamboo cutter, it happened to the suitors. I'm just
So
wondering if it's
I
something you noticed.
so now you mention it, I think I had that, but not quite in the same way. You I just kind of want to go back to points, the themes you were seeing there. You'd said the themes of the happiness not being a possession. I think I can say that in a more general way. I
Hmm.
think it's more the It's more just the freedom to be yourself versus the gilded cage that comes
Ooh,
with the prestige, and I think that kind of fits that more.
yeah, I
I
think
do
so.
think, yeah, it's more general and again, kind of that overarching bit. And when you look at the father, I don't think he realized he was putting her in a gilded cage. I mean, you see that when she releases that sparrow, I think it was the bird, right? It's like, no, you don't belong in a cage, and
Well, it's interesting because it was also the cage that he crafted for her,
it was,
which goes back to the first feeling that I had in this piece was I thought this bamboo this bamboo cutter makes things of bamboo, make fine baskets and weaves,
yeah,
and he's found a girl within the bamboo. What will he make of her?
hmm,
That was the first introduction thought I had, and then I knew it would be the story of this father trying to over provide.
yeah,
It did do this thing for me, which is always a negative aspect, where in a film where if someone just expresses themselves, the entire thing will just unravel and the conflict will go away.
I
Um,
didn't mind that here this time because again, I think there's the cultural aspect,
oh yeah,
right?
especially in the time period this is supposed to take place, the rapid aging of the girl, though I think by the end of it, she's like 6 or 7 years old total, maybe eight. Been around for that many human years.
Yeah,
I just to put it out there, like if she just expressed her feelings to her father would have turned around immediately. However,
mm,
if her father, alternatively, if her father paid more attention to how she was instead of what she could be, he would have
right.
seen. So if those two people actually just had a conversation about it, it'd be like, okay, we're going back to the mountain, we're good.
Yeah.
I mean, they had a bunch of gold. It's not like they needed to worry, but I mean, thematically and the story and the time, I agree. I agree. It did work out, but that's also where this story falls apart for me, because it ended on such a down note. I, I, ju-
Um,
I just didn't get it at the end, and this is why it was a bit of a downer for me. I enjoyed it so much, and then it just ended abruptly. There was no realization of the characters that they learned a lesson. There was no growth. It was just everyone's sad, and now she's going back to the moon because she's.
so I think there's a couple things around that. So the bittersweetness, I wasn't upset with the bittersweetness.
Mm,
I thought I saw a through line where she wouldn't be taken back to the moon, specifically from the song goes, "If you pine for me,
mm,
if you truly pine for me," right? So I thought there was going to be that aspect there, but I think when it comes to the lessons that you're talking about, I think there's different types of folklore.
mm.
I suspect you're kind of tying a couple of different types together.
Oh, probably.
So, because it sounds like you're talking more about an Aesop fable,
Yes.
where there's 100% clearly a lesson, whereas you don't always get that in in fairy tales. They can be more of just the general themes and feelings, right, as opposed to a lesson. So, when I look at this, I look at more of there was a resolution to the living free versus being gilded cage. It wasn't happy, but a
Mm,
lot of fairy tales aren't,
that's
right?
true.
So she was in this gilded cage and she was so miserable, and unfortunately her father didn't see it or didn't with whatever was blinding him, right? Be it the status that he felt he was getting, or more likely just the status he felt his princess deserved,
I think
right?
it was the latter.
It's yeah, it's definitely the latter. So, not realizing that it put her in such a cage that essentially she wished she was dead, and, it's almost that point, it's like if you'd noticed that little bit sooner, you would have been able to stop her from taking a leap. I think that's where that story comes from. So because of that, there wasn't really a way you could end it on a happy note. It had to have that bittersweet ending for that aspect of the lesson to be there.
Mm.
Right? That aspect of a theme.
Well, it's something as simple as one of the other takes of the Tale of the Woodcutter that I had watched afterwards. She went back to the moon. The bamboo cutter and his wife moved back to their original home, which had a hole in the roof, and they lived happily ever after because they would feel the daughter via the moonlight.
Right.
There wasn't an emotional resolution for me.
Mm,
I did, however, at the end when they started doing the song with the kids, like kind of walking in with the aide who quickly became a character that I enjoyed. The little stout one.
yeah.
They kind of that was a little roller coaster to me because it's like, oh, she's snapping out of it, like something's gonna happen, something big, and then it kind of ended up going back anyways.
Yeah.
Um, but I just wonder if I was looking at it via a different lens, if I would see it as more of a complete story. Because
Mm,
this is one of the reasons why when you asked if I found my happiness through this film, I ended on no.
yeah.
Because I didn't feel happy coming out of the film. And
Mm,
I guess I'm also I'm not as well versed in the fables and the fairy tales as you.
yeah.
I'm more used to the adaptations,
Right.
which almost always end up on some type of positive note.
Yeah.
Um, the happiness where the friends we made along the way kind of situations.
Yeah. Ariel
Um,
gets to marry Eric, for example. Yeah.
one of the overarching themes that I really enjoyed, and I think you probably would have picked up a lot on this one, were the poles of the free life verse, that gilded cage, like the life
Mm,
of a princess. And it even starts early. So early, like when the boys were calling for little bamboo and the bamboo cutter was calling for a princess, she stops, recognizes both, but then chooses to go to be the princess there. And I feel like the only reason why she kept going towards that princess thing is because she felt it would make her father happy.
I completely agree. I think she actually even says that at one point in the film. And this kind of goes back to again the it's gotten so bad that she just wishes to end it because she straight up comments like, if you make me go to the emperor's court, sure, you get your courtier's hat, and that will be the end of me. I will get you your happiness, but know that this is what it's going to cost you. And I found multiple times throughout, like she was good at calling out what she could kind of see as fake happiness.
Mm.
I feel like she did it with the suitors in the same way. It's like, okay, if you haven't seen me, you think that's what's going to make you happy? Well, you better go out and get me these impossible objects. Prove it.
That's a good way to put it. And that also that does give a bit of conclusion to the movie for me, you expressing it in that way.
Yeah.
Because the father finally realized that it's not bringing her happiness, but also was able to express that final cost.
Hmm.
Because I think a lot of this was related to the cost of happiness. The like the fact that the suitors, the objects that they needed to obtain, all had some form of cost to them that left
Yeah.
them all ruined, be that losing their life or financially. For her being like a filial daughter and choosing her family's happiness was at the cost of her own freedom.
Yeah.
And that's probably what this is, just the balancing of costs,
Yeah.
I guess would be the best way to put it.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that's it. It's I know I don't know quite as much about East Asian mythology, but the bits I do know, it's again that yin yang
Mm.
aspect. When that gets out of balance, things go bad. And I think essentially that's what happened. The points where she clearly lost that balance in a couple of places. Hearing all of the people at the naming party, naming banquet, when they're just tearing apart her father, and she's listening to that, and going into that nightmare sequence.
I think that was
I
part
felt
of
that's
the
the
nightmare
most.
sequence. I think that was her
No,
subconscious talking to her, and that's why she
uh,
ran. I,
I I'm
I
of mixed thoughts of that
like the way
because
that I took it was. I mean, either way, the end result is the same.
yeah,
But I felt the as amazingly animated and emotional that section was.
mhm,
Them tearing apart the father and her just like bailing.
yeah.
I,
I,
I
I I think that she did hear them say that.
mm,
I do think she snapped, like, because I mean she snapped that dish, right? I do think she said that, and I think so. I've seen a couple of interpretations on this. So some of this kind of goes back to the idea of where I thought she was a spirit. It's like she took off like a spirit, right? In that nightmare scene. So I thought it was real because like even the interaction where they were talking about the death of the mountain because that was all part of that nightmare sequence,
mm.
right? So I think that sh she did actually reach out. One thing I heard, I'm not completely sold on this. A theory is that she basically was so miserable at that point that that was like a first suicide attempt almost for her. I don't quite agree with that, but I can see where that interpretation could come from.
Yeah, I think that's a reach.
Yeah, I think that one's a reach, but
I
I
think it
can
was more
see
of
it.
like I'm closer to supernatural progression.
Yeah,
One of the reasons why is she did get to the mountain. The people, the old family, and those boys had left.
yeah,
She interacts with the same characters that took pity on her and fed her
yeah.
later on in the movie.
Well, that
Uh,
was heartbreaking.
so those are aspects that she could only know if she was there somehow.
Yeah,
But she didn't physically leave.
yeah. And
It's
then that
it.
is kind of where I lean towards it.
It's interesting because you going from the spiritual side, I was going from more supernatural beast side.
Mm,
So when she went tearing off into the night, I mean, awesome scene, just
yes.
so beautiful. Like her breaking through all the doors and then stripping the silks, the colorful silks, like as if you know layers are molting in my aspect, and just the way she was running through the
Mhm,
hills to me was like a supernatural beast,
right.
which that comes from the foreshadowing and what I was observing early in the movie. So I see where you're coming from with the spirits. In my opinion, she did visit. She
Mm,
was there. But we also see later in the movie that she does have some form of power.
yeah.
So I wouldn't be surprised. Actually, you see her as a character having powers to manipulate things immediately. Yeah, the only way that she could know about various aspects and various characters and various things that happened on the mountain would
Yeah.
be as if she had visited some.
Yeah. That scene was I watched that scene twice, like back to back, with how well it was done. The animation again just leads itself so well. It wouldn't be able to get that same emotion from any other medium.
Well, it
Like,
directly went to calling to like Japanese traditional, like more charcoal
yeah,
um, pieces, and there was just a splash of red.
yeah,
And I just realized through us kind of talking about this that the first and second dreams, like almost thematically opposite,
hmm,
and they both reversed at the end.
yeah,
So sure, it's not that the mountain was dying; it's that it's going through its cycle of rebirth.
yeah,
Was the end. So it went from a nightmare, like pitiful, like downtrodden, to silver lining.
yeah,
Whereas the second dream was freedom and happiness and joy, and then ending in sadness. She has to leave, despair, which is
yeah.
right at the end, which is interesting. And if I can we just talk how Sudamaru is a bad father? How he went from having a wife and a child to immediately, yeah, I'll run away with you. Just
Yeah, I
saying.
definitely, that was definitely there, and this is, it's,
I'm gonna give it to him. It did come off as a dream for him,
yes,
but like I was sitting here and I'm like, what are you doing? You were just giving a piggyback ride to your kid. And I'm just like, they
well,
did so well with those transitions, is what I'm trying to say,
yeah,
that it also made me suspect which parts are dream and which are not.
yeah,
And if I were to go back, I mentioned to when this film came up, I mentioned this to you about I think Totoro.
mm,
If you go into that movie thinking that the little girls are dead and the mothers actually had a psychological break from it, it's a very different movie.
yeah,
I'm wondering what happened if we went back into this movie, considering what is dream and what is not.
mm.
But I don't want to get too
Yes. Well, I
off the
mean,
trail.
like, Tsunomaru wasn't the only one who would basically ditch his entire family for them. I mean, technically, like the third suitor, the one that came back with the wildflower, his wife was there, and that's who he confronted when they opened the blinds. So I mean, it's maybe it's a polygamy thing, and I think Sudamaru did care about her enough that it's like if the only chance you have is us running away, we run away.
Well, I mean, there was a supernatural aspect to her. Like everyone was drawn to her in some aspect, even from like the sound of her voice or the sound of her music. She could command these people of high status just to shut the heck up.
Yeah,
Like I wouldn't be surprised if there was some supernatural draw. She was said to be like the most beautiful thing ever seen,
yeah.
etc. But these dreams, I'm wondering, I'm wondering the placement in the movie for me is hard because one is obviously closer to the middle, one is closer to the end. I'm wondering how much they affected my view on the story as a whole
Okay.
because I feel like instead of predicting things, they were more drawing them existing themes to the forefront. Much like you would have a dream, like if you're feeling repeated stresses yourself, eventually they'll come out in a dream in a big manner. This kind of seemed to be placed in the same way. So what I mean is, you kind of get that feeling leading up to this that she's in a position that she probably shouldn't be in. It's mostly titles. It's mostly a facade. She doesn't want to be there. She wants the freedom. This is a negative thing for her, and all she wants to do is leave. And then she has
Mhm.
that first dream, which expresses it very well.
Yeah.
And then I guess after that, it kind of phases into the story beat, more of a search for freedom. So she's actualized, or not actualized, she understands her reality now after
Yeah.
that. And then from there, it's the search for freedom.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, because after that she becomes the perfect noble lady in training after that first break. She's just like, no, I'm in the cage now. Until she drives away the suitors. And Sagami's like, no, there's not gonna be others and leaves. And all of a sudden, she's back to being herself, like being that getting to have that freedom, making the garden that was a perfect replica of the mountain and just going and working the weave machine, right? uh,
That kind of culminates in that
yeah,
last dream.
yeah, and it culminates in the last dream. The the suicide interpretation, I can definitely think that fits in the second dream. I think was reaching out to Sidmaru, hoping that looking for a savior
Hmm.
essentially after she'd already been in it. But I mean that ends with her with a fall, and again is that too late aspect. So yeah, there's the dream sequences are. I mean, they're dream sequences. It always is, a mind twist to to try to figure out exactly what's happening there.
Yeah,
And
I definitely think they were just used as a like an anchor point for the various themes and emotion in the film
Yeah,
to essentially bring a resolution to a chapter.
yeah,
I mean, before that, if I were to look at it from a structural standpoint, you probably have the youth to when they leave to the city,
right.
and then you have the city to the dream sequence, or alternatively, was seeing Sutamaru before the first dream sequence? I think it was.
No,
Um,
I think it was after.
that was
I'm pretty sure it was after the first dream sequence because
yes, because she had
yeah,
her name. It was after. So yeah, it wouldn't have been that. It would have been the dream, and then that to the next dream, and then a small ending.
yeah, that
Which
that would make sense because I think like those points make sense. I can't quite remember this, but I know like most Western media follows a three act structure.
mhm.
I believe a lot of Eastern media follows a four-act structure.
Mm,
So it's a slightly with a slightly different pacing, and you see this in you don't see it so much in like the shonen actiony type anime, but you'll see it a little bit more in like the slice of life. I find it in Japanese or like Japanese horror and such as well,
mm.
where things the pacing feels off from our standpoint because a lot of it starts happening more at the end. And I think you kind of touched on that earlier, where it felt, there was the build up, and then a lot of the emotion went up and down a lot more rapidly
Yeah,
in the latter half, and I think that comes from that structure. Don't quote me on that because it's a passing thing that I like. I've watched a few videos on a few times, so I know I don't quite have it grasped.
yeah, and I'm just a layman with opinions.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
I might get a shirt that just says that layman with opinions. Yeah, as far as the structures go, like I could draw it out on paper, and it didn't mess with me too much until the end, because the end of the movie was so rapid to me, like a very very slow curve to when it started actually climaxing, and I might actually be looking at this completely wrong, but it seemed like a very static line with ups and downs and then just shot upwards. So I'm definitely looking at this from a more Western movie point of view.
yeah, because and I definitely think that's yeah, because it's just a different way that the events are there. So I think things that we would expect to kind of been led into earlier in the film from a more Western standpoint, yeah, wouldn't happen until later in.
Yeah, I wonder. There was characters that I thought might have a bigger role. Thought there was interactions that would occur that did not. The movie as a whole kept me guessing.
Mm,
So like I thought Sudamaru was going to have a bigger imprint on the whole thing. I didn't expect. I mean, the suitors thing when it comes to folklore and fairy tales made a whole lot of sense, and I really enjoyed that.
yeah.
But instead, what I expected was Sudamaru to come around and that to be a subject to reintroduce that character rather than just another dream sequence. I mean, if we look at him as the representation of the freedom and
Mhm.
therefore a representation of happiness, it makes a lot of sense where he comes in and he leaves and so forth. As a standard story beat, I actually expected to come back to be a character once again.
Right. I think I think his character was there. I honestly think his character was there enough for
Well, for what they were doing, yes.
yeah, right. Like it was. I mean, definitely think he had the impact, even though he wasn't present for half the film.
Mm.
Her entire early life is around him, and I'm assuming his brothers. Continuing to play in that free spirit right from birth, essentially, to the point that when gone from her life, so she goes back from the nightmare sequence to find him again, finds him again, and is feels absolutely helpless to be able to save him when he's getting beat, right? To she's straight up saying is like, you would have been I would have been happy with you. I can tell that.
Mm.
So he, in a way, he was always present without being present. I think even again with the suitors, she, I think she called them on their bullshit strictly because she knew, because of the relationship she had with Sudamaru.
Mm.
So she could see right through it. She knew instantly it wasn't genuine. And the closest any of the suitors came to being genuine was the one talking about the wildflower, where it's like, yeah, no, that this where it made it seem like she had a little bit more of that passion for life, even though didn't, right? But she was making all the promises of let's run away to the mountains. We don't need all of this,
And
right?
she was tempted though. She
Yeah,
was like in tears, and that was an emotional scene for me because I was like, I went from FAR girl call them on their BS to, oh geez, like this guy's actually promising her things she wants and she
yeah,
needs. Obviously, the suitor wasn't truthful. Like I didn't get that from
yeah,
him at all. But
yeah.
I do I do like how that was kind of the middle point of the film, the suitors.
Mhm.
There was just something so character defining of her issuing a challenge of that sort, like these unobtainable objects that you say that I am like. You want to be married to me, you're going to have to provide me with this object. So it kind of establishes her in such a way of these men thought of her only as a prize to begin with.
Yeah,
Like when they were racing to be the first one to get there,
yeah.
like they were giving you the distinct impression it was because Kaguya was a prize to be won.
Yes.
So it was super refreshing when she was just like, all right, you're gonna need to be bring me these things. If you say I'm like these, then these things and these things must exist. Therefore, you must bring me this thing to prove that you love me.
Yeah.
And then I was hoping that she would individually rebuff them, but you had two off screen that died or got lost or whatnot. You had the two. There's
Yeah.
like, okay, burn the fire rat thing, and then the jewelers, the artisans.
Yeah.
Uh, I did laugh when the young one fell when trying to get into the sparrow's nest and then he landed. But the whole like,
I think they did that on purpose. I think I know exactly where you're going with that 'cause
yeah,
it was funny. And then just that mic drop of, yeah, he's dead.
yeah.
Okay. And
Well, in other animated stuff like this, even from Ghibli, like a fall from twice that height into a pot would be like just a comedical act. So
yeah,
they definitely turned that around well.
yeah,
Um,
I
that all goes back to cost, like the tree with the jeweled branches, the spending your fortune and going on this adventure overseas and getting lost in a storm or losing your life. I guess for the second suitor, he lost, I assume, his marriage because he was already married.
yeah.
So, like the cost of pursuing these things seemed to be a recurring theme, but I don't think it, as we discussed before, I don't think it was the major one.
Yeah, I think it was something to accentuate the overall idea of happiness as opposed to being a theme in and of itself. When I saw the suitors at that point there, I honestly almost had to go and recheck the title because I was thinking, is this the tale of Princess Kaguya or the tales of,
Oh,
right? Because I could kind of see those segments. I think again the bigger thing of that, there's the cost aspect there, but again there's also the idea of I think the death of the one suitor plays back more to the idea of her of the happiness and just her wanting to enjoy life
mm,
because she has a complete breakdown the second she hears of his death. Right,
yeah.
she goes and destroys her garden and everything. So
That was a weird emotional point for me if we were to discuss that scene just for a moment, because the emotions that were expressed to me there were that it just culminated that she knew this whole thing was a farce and that her garden was just a stand-in for the mountain that she really truly liked. But none of it seemed to be that this mission and this thing that she gave to this person cost him his life. That just seemed to be, I mean, self-centered is probably the wrong connotation I want to give about it, but she definitely, where her father only had sights for what she could be, in that instance she only had sights for what she didn't have, which was freedom. Which, I mean, it was a pivotal scene for her, for sure. But there was just something about that, like, you gave this guy a mission and it caused him to lose his life, and the breakdown seemed to trigger it, but was unrelated.
So I guess, and this could be why I saw it that way.
Hmm.
The him losing his life. 'Cause, if you think back, or I said I always assumed she was a spirit,
Yes.
and I thought she was a spirit of the mountain. Right. So at this point here, we still don't know about the moon connection.
Yeah.
So I saw that as a snap because it's the antithesis of her being a spirit of the life of the mountain.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So, right. So that's where my thoughts came from that, and that's where my idea of I think it led me to the right idea, even though it was the wrong
Yeah, yeah. No,
inciting
I
point,
I get what you're
right? Because
saying.
it's the idea of just valuing life, be that the freedom to run around in a field with your friends, or the the music, or the sounds of nature, all of that. And so when she sees herself as the cause of that, and it's really again just accumulation of all of this, the entire facade, for lack of a better term, of her life in the capital,
Hmm.
it snaps. And when you hit an emotional peak like that, you lash out at the things you care about,
True.
and that garden is what she cared about, that mountain is what she cared about. So I think that's the culmination, because it's not like it was out of nowhere. Like, there was always that build of it. She had that bit of freedom again because she just figured the suitors wouldn't even bother trying,
Hmm.
and gets pulled back in because all of a sudden three of the suitors are showing up with their gifts, to find out she's not even going to see the last see the other suitors because of what happened, right?
Yeah.
So so I think that's where that comes from. That's where that snap comes from.
I'll tell you what though. I'm super I'm super happy about what the film didn't do.
Okay.
So in Western media, if a girl who wanted freedom became a princess, reluctantly she would end up taking upon the role and leadership and then being, the best princess she could be while still being a wild child or something. That
Yeah.
that's your Disney take.
Yeah.
So they completely just didn't do that, which was
Mhm.
super refreshing to me. That same old story, just told over and over and over again. I've had enough of it. So the fact that it was she didn't go like, "Oh, there is value in this and this is who I actually am, even though I can balance this with being wild and being myself."
Yeah.
Because thematically over the course of the movie, they express very well that becoming like a princess or a nobility figure was not her.
Mhm.
And you could see it. I mentioned this earlier. Every time she would go into her princess mode activates, all the life drains out of her eyes.
Mhm.
Like the top lid goes completely flat and it's very downtrodden and droopy. So when her posture's correct and she's moving demurely and playing the instrument really well, there doesn't seem to be that happy expression on her face
Yeah.
where it is all for show. I just wish the father could have seen that, because I
Yeah.
know I know for a fact with his character, if he had seen and been able to acknowledge that, he would have given up life in the capital at a drop of a hat and just gone back to being a woodcutter.
Yeah.
But he was blind to it, right?
That's exactly it. He it is that idea of, but this is what makes people happy. I don't know. It even carries through to modern culture. People just think that being the rich or the famous or something is what happiness is and what success is. I think a lot of people need to realize that that's not what it is. Sometimes, you find your happiness and your success can be defined as something as simple as having enough money to go to a movie when you want.
Yeah.
And I wish more people realized that. And he clearly wasn't being there's no maliciousness in it. You definitely see that when he realizes, oh crap, he probably could have prevented a lot of this, like after the whole emperor scene,
Oh, yeah,
right?
the entire. He could have.
Right? And it's like he's literally doing everything he can to protect his daughter. And I got again that feeling that yeah, he would have immediately left and brought them back to the mountain. I actually found it so heartbreaking when Kaguya and the mother go back to the mountain, and he said like that same family that fed her when she was, you know, essentially a destitute there, and they see her there because there was just such joy in her being back in the mountain, and it was almost that loss of innocence feel, like when they see her, it's like, oh no, you're
Yeah, a princess, and they
a
bow
princess, and they
deeply
bow
and
and
run pretty much. Yeah, the instant switch in the facial expressions of her character at
yeah,
that scene, because it went from like that Kaguya, or I guess if you're to differentiate the little bamboo, full of life, full of happiness, instantly into
yeah.
princess mode Kaguya, who, I mean, that's my favorite Saturday morning Japanese animated cartoon. Um, but yeah, she goes into princess mode, and then instantly life drains from her eyes, and that was heartbreaking to me as well. It was that scene itself was very complex because it made me realize that parts of the dream were correct or real, but it also did very well at highlighting who she is and what she's experienced versus how she's treated and how it makes her feel. And you can't help but not feel something
Yeah.
at that point.
And it's amazing that again, just like that quick scene, that quick turn, in that second, and she knows she can never go back,
True.
right? And it's literally in a flash of a second. It's amazing to see that and have it expressed so clearly.
Yeah, it's all the little things in this movie when it comes to the seasons changing and time passing, the emotions that it expresses, from like a freedom loving little roly poly ball of jelly, little bamboo, adventuring with the boys and like helping her father, to the sadness she feels trying to learn how to become like this nobility.
Yeah.
Overall, I wouldn't mind seeing a visual representation of the balance, like as you mentioned earlier, but maybe something on like a scale throughout this entire movie, so you can see where it's like pulling, because it seems to change gradually and then rapidly snap back, and change gradually and snap back, emotionally speaking.
Yeah. And it's one of those things that might see something a little bit more on repeat viewing.
Mm,
I definitely felt it, that yin yang balance, but yeah, I can't think of anything offhand visually either that really points to it, but I'm sure there is something there. I mean, again, it's one of the things Ghibli is they're good at showing that in other films. So
I'm beginning to wonder if in those scenes, if the only real splashes of a color were like in the robe she was wearing,
mm,
things like that. I bet you if we rewatched it, we'd be like, oh yeah, okay. So nothing else has color in this scene except the robe sheet that she has to wear. Things
Yeah.
like that.
There's a few times I kind of noticed something like that, but I can't
Like
quite.
pinpoint or place.
Yeah, I can't quite pinpoint it to what was happening in the story beats around there to say how that connected. Like the only very clear one I can think of again is that nightmare scene, right? So, but again, I associated that again more with the seasons at first.
Mm,
But you're right; it might have been more of an attempt to be a yin and yang or something like that, right?
it's hard to say. Like you've opened me up to a lot of different potential thought patterns to kind of view this movie with. I'm really interested how I'd feel about it on another viewing. I'm wondering if watching the other Ghibli movies that I don't like with the same kind of aspect might change my point of view.
Mm.
But this one did the thing that just makes me dislike some of these Ghibli movies, which is like, can I buy ending? Thanks. Where it's like, oh yeah, and she's from the moon. With what? I know this is based off of a folk tale, and this is likely something that would be implied through some type of context that way. But as someone coming into it, I'm just like, oh no, yeah, she's from the moon now. What?
Yeah,
Now she has to go back. I would have much preferred a woodland spirit or goddess of the mountain.
mhm.
It just there was nothing foreshadowing about it.
I can think of one thing in retrospect that does, but this is very loose.
Hmm.
The song that she sang was always talking about following the sun, and in a lot of mythology, the sun and moon are basically counterparts to each
Yeah.
other, as opposed to that's the only thing I can think of,
Yeah, but that's like
offhand.
that's Devon levels. We need simple Drew levels here.
Right. Um, ag- Again, some of this might be again not being as versed in Japanese symbolism in the same way. So, example that I always think of is with Sailor Moon.
Hmm.
Her name is Usagi, which means rabbit, and I go, well, what the heck does that mean? Well, in Japan, they don't see the man in the moon or a lady in the moon; they see a rabbit in the moon.
Hmm.
So there's a connection with the name Usagi, which immediately ties her to the moon, which in a way could be a foreshadowing to her being of, you know, Princess Serenity and being Sailor Moon. There's that tie there. So I don't know if things like there might be a tie to bamboo having a meaning or something like that that we just don't necessarily know.
That's true.
So
I mean,
um,
aesthetically, the way that she was unveiled from the bamboo stalk could have been a commonly viewed depiction of a moon spirit or
yeah.
something like that. I just it was just so out of nowhere for me. And then you throw on the sorrow of the characters with no emotional resolution, in my opinion, to the story, and I f- I left the movie with no conclusion. This is the one of the we talked we spent an hour talking about the things we liked about the movie. It's probably about time we talk about the thing I don't like, which is how I felt this movie is incomplete. Leaving it 30-second epilogue or vocal outro would have been nice to me. Like, what happened to the parents?
So I see where you're coming from with this. And I'm not 100% certain I agree with your ideas of it being a lack of ending.
Hmm.
So again, I've said this before. Like very early on, I figured she was going to die young.
Yeah. Well, I thought she was gonna have to go somewhere, go back somewhere.
Yeah, yeah. I just jumped on again the seasons like winter, death.
Hmm.
I immediately had those thoughts, and then again seeing the dream sequence where she was flying and then basically just plummets to the ground. I'm like, so I got those kind of I saw the metaphors of her dying there, and so I see again. I don't see a good like it's not a happy ending resolution by any means.
Well, I wouldn't even see
But
that as a resolution. Like, she dies, everyone's sad, end the movie.
what else do you really need? Like you talk about the epilogue. So I mean, I know you said you saw another, listened to another version of it where they went back to the house and saw her moonlight. It's like, yeah, I could see again like a few seconds scene for that, but beyond that, I think just the
I'll tell you what I want.
all right.
I want Bamboo Cutter and his wife with no indication of whether or
Mm,
not they went back to the mountain or they're still there, just like maybe on a bench, just wearing average clothes. And
yeah,
Sudamaro in a similar situation, maybe like holding his sleeping child. And then independently, they're just looking at the moon. Fade to credits.
all right,
That would have been enough of a conclusion for me.
okay.
It's just there some type of emotional conclusion because this entire thing was an emotional piece to me. So it just left me in a state where I was like, now what? I'm sad now. Now what do I do?
For me, I didn't. Sad isn't quite the word that I would use for my feelings at the end of the film.
Hmm.
And this could be where that
Oh,
distinction
for
comes
sure.
from. So I saw it as bittersweet, and the way it ended just left me contemplative. I sat in silence for about half an hour after the film, just taking that in. So I didn't feel like it needed anything more.
Hmm.
I feel like while we didn't get the post scene essentially of the parents, we got we had it just before that, right? The final resolution with the parents was them getting a few more moments with their daughter when she snaps out of it because of hearing the song. That was that was their end
Hmm.
for me. So to me, the final lingering scene was her glancing back at the earth, showing that there was still that she still had that little bit of emotion, even though she couldn't connect. That for me was the end, was the emotional ending. That was what needed to be there. I didn't need to see anything around them because we've already seen the effect of she's had on Sudamaro, on her dad, on her mom. We needed to see the effect that lingered with her.
Hmm. Okay, I see where you're coming from. It's weird to have like two completely different emotional takes on a piece like that.
Yeah,
And I think they did well in this film to go back to a positive to allow you to project upon the film, but not completely or not wholly. So the vast majority was the emotions they were trying to express, but you could still project aspects of yourself. It's not full like superhero neutral mask where like you are the superhero. This was
yeah,
definitely like these are the things I feel and I can see them
hmm,
reflected back at me by this film, I guess would be the best way to see it.
yeah. I think they did have the idea of her possibly being able to be saved with Satamaru and her handmaiden when she was hearing the song. Because I figured that that pining might have done it. Yeah, I think that's
Oh, I see what you're saying. So the pining mentioned in the song to come home, you were looking at it as the pining of those around her for her so that she would remain.
yeah.
See, my perspective of that was the opposite. Was her
Okay.
when confronted by the inappropriate prince or royalty or king or whatever he was. She pined for escape or to leave there to go home and called to the moon, so she had to go return back to the moon. But that is
Yeah.
also kind of obvious based on the story. I do, I love it and I hate it.
Mm,
That scene where the the handmaiden comes in with the children and they're singing the song, and she pauses because it gives you that glimpse. Oh, she can stay and there's gonna be a happily ever after. But like 5 seconds later, it's like no,
Yeah.
robe on her, and I'm just like what? And that's probably where that feeling of loss that I have comes from because of that
Yeah.
fake, not fake, but that I got duped there.
Yeah. Yeah. They give you just enough hope. And I mean, yeah, I felt that because again, that's where I saw in the song. I think your interpretation is probably closer to what the intention was.
Oh, really? I was thinking yours.
Well,
I
okay, so
mean,
so
I
it's
see what you're saying that I'm super smart and always right, but I think on this one,
um so it's we've talked about this off stream. Like the interpretation of music is such a subjective thing,
mm,
and not only that, we're going into this with music that we're not hearing in our native language, so we don't know if there's actually nuances
mm,
in in what they're saying or anything like that. So I took that pining and those few glimmers of hope with the last few moments with Sadamaru, with her parents, with her handmaiden, right? And that's what I was thinking that that pining might do it, even though she was very clear that no, it was too late still. I think it gave me that bit of hope. But the idea of pining for home, I can kind of see that as well.
yeah,
It's
it's just because it doesn't work thematically for me. It's abrasive, the two concepts in my head,
yeah,
because her consideration of home, I mentioned this, would be the mountain,
yeah. No, you're right.
but it could be also context and words, because
Mhm.
words, especially in other cultures, will have different meanings depending on word usage. Whereas the difference between me asking you where you're from and where's your home are two, will have two different
Yeah,
places. If you were to ask me where I was from, I would probably say Saskatchewan or Alberta. If you ask me where home is, I'd probably say Vancouver Island.
yeah,
So I'm wondering if in deeper look or more cultural context, if that would be a thing. But I
yeah,
mean, we're just speculating at that point.
yeah. Exactly. I'm sure there's something lost in translation. I think I want to say it's probably fairly minor what's lost in translation because I think they did very well with the visuals and the emotions of it. So
Well, I mean, the
I think it's
emotions are
more just the new,
universal.
yeah. I think it's just more the nuances and again maybe there's just these little bits of foreshadowing that we didn't see or something from that.
Even with a sense of loss and the lacking of an ending, in my opinion, I still would rate this film highly. It just did so well in its expression. I would give this 9 out of 12 beautiful layers of robes.
I'm gonna go a little bit higher. I'm gonna give this a 10 out of 12 beautiful robes, which I'm fairly happy with. So
Hmm.
this has been Beauty and the Beast Media Club. Join us next time on Second Wall for the fourth part in season one wrap up to Carolyn Tuesday. And following that, Event Horizon on Media Club. Check out beautyandthebeast.com for the list of platforms and services we're on. However, if there's someone out there that you love, we'd make the perfect proposal gift. See you next time.
Peace.